Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is James Aman. I'm the CTO of Topl. And there's some of my lovely team over in the corner, Garnered and Alex and Anna. And feel free to add other questions and myself. So today we're going to talk about traceability of the blockchain. And to be completely honest, blockchains are like literally the whole point of them is like traceability, right? It's everything that a blockchain enables is traceable. So this really could be one of the most broad topics that we could talk about dealing with blockchains in general. So that being said, like specifically, what I think people mean when they say traceability is more like supply chains specifically, right? So really, as much as I would love to talk about some of the great things that you can do with like just quote unquote traceability, we'll kind of focus in on supply chains and really very broadly I'm going to talk about some processes that are enabled by blockchains, or like what are some projects right there people are pursuing blockchains, and ultimately they're all pretty much the same. There's really not a lot of novelty in their solutions. But what I really want to do is towards the end, what I really want to impress upon you is kind of the constraints that blockchains aren't this end-all be-all perfect thing. They come with their own set of things that you need to think about and address. And if you address them, then you get a lot of benefits. But so basically putting it forward as what are the questions you should ask whenever you're thinking about these sorts of solutions. So then specifically for like supply chains, right? So this is a really kind of astonishing thing that I found from a study by McKinsey, where showing that if you kind of look at these two charts, basically 12%, 11%, like a very, very small percentage of these, okay, maybe their size is somewhat small, 639 respondents, but a very small percentage of companies kind of really think through their supply chain efficiencies and like what they could actually achieve and really try to like optimize every bit of it. And kind of one of the promises of blockchain is that it makes these sorts of optimizations that you can do on a supply chain actually incredibly easy. So then one of the other things that you can say with a blockchain is this ability to counter counterfeit fraud, which as I put here, some report estimated that in 2015, there's 1.8 trillion in counterfeit fraud lost globally. So then another thing that you can get with these blockchains is the ability to more easily meet increasing regulatory requirements, basically traceability of individual things on a like micro level, and so we'll talk a bit about that. Okay, so here I want to say why blockchains in general, and first off I want to say that you might hear people talk about this things called DLTs, or distributed ledger technologies, one of which is blockchains, and another really popular type are called DAGs, direct asymmetric drafts. And in general, people like these things because they're immutable, right? And by that is not so far as like when stuff goes on them, it's not changing. It's that when you put things on the blockchain or any of these distributed ledger technologies, you can see when it has been changed, right? So there's a full audit trail that is built in. It's not like bolted onto the side like you might, because you can do SQL databases with auditing built in, or like bolted onto the side, so that whenever someone makes a change, you can see the trail, but it's not intrinsically part of the SQL like language, right? So you can there's always ways that you can manipulate those things, and the best audit trails you could ever have, without it being baked into the very fundamental core. There's no way you can like guarantee. And with blockchains, you get mathematical guarantee, just in its very nature. So then a silly thing that I want to address here is that, in doing kind of my research for this, I kept reading this thing. People are saying like unhackable, and consensus means that everyone agrees. And you have to be very careful with those things, right? There are certain types of consensus algorithms, and I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm going like too deep in detail, but there are certain types of consensus algorithms where every participant has to agree, right? But not every blockchain is like that. And they're only unhackable insofar as you have to satisfy the security guarantees of the blockchain, right? Almost every blockchain assumes an honest majority, right? And if you don't have an honest majority, you can't actually make any security guarantees about the blockchain. So it actually, even as you fall away from that 51%, if you have 30% malicious or 40% malicious, even then your security guarantees, the time for your guarantees starts to like go up. And when you hit that 51% mark, that you basically can't make there's no more time anymore that you can say that it's going to be secure. So you have to be careful about what is actually meant when people say these things. Built-in replication, obviously, blockchains are like the way they work is you just replicate it all over the place. But there's their own set of constraints as well. But one of the things that people really like about it is the addition of smart contracts. So Ethereum made it such that you can have autonomous business logic. Basically, when something happens, blockchains are a type of thing called, like a mechanism design called a deterministic state machine. And a deterministic state machine means that when there's a certain input, that puts the machine into a specific state, and that state is well defined, like everyone knows what it is, and that something happens, and then there's an output, and then it returns back to like some idle state. So this autonomous business logic, and even further to say a customizable autonomous business logic, was the innovation for Ethereum. And this is smart contracts, right? But more generally, just the idea that you can put business logic in this way that's decentralized over many computers, and everyone has to. And if you do it correctly, you get these guarantees of immutability and unhackability. Okay, so I shamelessly stole this slide from a very good presentation about blockchain IoT below. But so you see kind of what instead of just replicating myself to say that traceability. These are some of the pain points you get in supply chains. So traceability, compliance, flexibility, stakeholder management, and blockchain gives you a great way to address these things. You get auditability, you have full built-in audit trails. Right? Everything is you can see how things evolved. Immutability, we talked about smart contracts, these business logic that you get to define, and then disintermediation. So the ability to people love talking about disintermediation because when you have these fully connected graphs, right? So I don't have the plot here, the picture here, but centralized infrastructures where you have like a hub and spoke, right? You have one central thing and a bunch of spokes going out. Then if anyone needs to talk, if any person on the edge wants to talk, they have to go through the central spoke, or the central part, right? Whereas in disintermediation, you use peer-to-peer networks, it's really good to have people connect to one another, but you still get all the benefits of being able to see the data and query. So that is really emphasized by this graph here, which I really like. Right, so this is showing how you might do a supply chain, an agricultural supply chain, right? So each person along this chain is adding some data to the chain, but every other person on the chain gets to see, right? So the information is viewable by everybody, but each person adds their own little bit, right? And by having this shared database, you really get to benefit from the growth. So what I want to emphasize though is that this sort of thing is possible, right, in current systems, right? The standardization thing, which a lot of people promote as like one of the reasons that blockchains are so great, is it's not a great argument in my opinion, right? Standardization on the blockchain is good, but it is this ability to connect peers and then have them talk in a standardized manner is what is important. Not the standardization is important, but if you, and as we know, like Visa is a central thing. They don't run a blockchain, but everyone can talk to Visa, and they standardize their thing because they basically have a monopoly, right? So you can have standardization without blockchains. It is that blockchains can do other things besides that. And then one of the things that people really like to talk about whenever they say, oh, I apologize, I should have said weirdly. Please, at any point you have questions, I am by no means a subject matter expert in supply chains as much as I'd like to be. I know what blockchains are, so I'd love to have discussions if anyone has any remarks about anything that I claim on these slides. Okay, so anyway, we talk about transparent data sharing. Then a big thing that people like to bring up when they talk about these things is, okay, great, like Bitcoin, everything's public, everything's transparent, but what about privacy? What about the times where I don't know what to reveal to my competitors that what I'm paying for the price of something, right? There are times where you need to keep certain data private. But at the same time, so the way we've done it traditionally is use silo data. Every company has their own database, they have their own invoices between this point-to-point B2B kind of connections. And as it turns out, that works somewhat, but then it's problems of how do we don't have standards anymore. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing. So one way that's being currently developed in for Ethereum and some other blockchains are privacy being possible through zero-knowledge proofs and permissioned networks. Permissioned networks are a really simple idea. Let's take a public technology that runs a public blockchain and actually have it run it between a set of nodes that we control and we authorize. And we're only going to say these IP addresses can get on the network, and anyone else they can see it, and we might encrypt all the data so that actually you can see the data flowing across the network, but you won't be able to read it because it's encrypted, and you can't submit anything to the network because you're not on the list of authorized people. The kind of in the elegant or in the kind of through line of what underlies blockchain and doing things from a mathematically rigorous point of view are what I like are zero-knowledge proofs. Right? So I really just want to take a minute to show you what a zero-knowledge proof is. Basically, the idea is, all right, this little guy, green guy, let's call him, Bob out here and Alice in there. So Bob says to Alice, okay, I want you to prove to me that you know you can get through this little door over here on the other side. Okay? And it's a little hidden, I'm sorry. It's this little door right here. Okay? So Alice says, all right, Bob. So Alice walks in, and Bob closes his eyes, and Alice picks a path, A or B. Right? And so Bob doesn't know which way Alice went. All he knows is that in step 2, he goes in and he says, well, I guess his name's Victor, or her name's Victor. So he walks in and he says, okay, come around, go through the door, and come out to me on path A or path B. And he just, right, and when he says come out through A, she can unlock the door and go around. Or if he says come out through B, she can just come back around. So every time Bob says something, Alice can satisfy it, right? But without revealing that she actually has the key, or maybe it's a mathematical puzzle that it takes to solve this thing. The fact is, he put a condition forward, she satisfied the condition, and he doesn't need to know anything about how she satisfied the condition, right? She could have either just come around the other side without unlocking the door, or she could have come to the door. He doesn't know, because he doesn't know whether she was in path A or path B. And all he knows is she satisfied the condition. This is a zero-knowledge proof. So you have I know I'm getting the terms all mixed up, and I apologize. But basically, the challenger just puts forward a condition, and the responder just satisfies the condition without revealing anything about how they were able to satisfy it. So zero knowledge to the challenger. These can get really crazy, right? You do things where entire blockchains are built on this, where the sender of the money is not known, the receiver of the money is not known, and the amount that was sent is not known yet. If someone gives you a transaction, they can make zero knowledge proof that was built using that information. When they build it, they essentially obfuscate all the data away, and then they give it to a challenger, and the challenger can automatically verify that the respondent told them the truth without ever revealing any information. Okay, so that's another way to do privacy. Exciting, I kind of like it. It's crazy though. But anyway, so then accountability, this is a huge one for supply chains. The ability for, because everything's like peer-to-peer, right? You are able to target causes of things more readily. Yeah, well, a big one is like Walmart wanting to be able to find out, if an E. coli outbreak happens, well, what was the common point that happened? If I can track where all of my lettuce comes from, and everybody's assimilated, and I start seeing this E. coli break out all over the country, well, maybe there's one factory that touched all that E. coli, and being able to collate that data really quickly, which isn't necessarily, like I said, something that a blockchain per se does for you, but by having the standardized process that a blockchain does kind of force you to use, then you're able to do that more quickly. And having this, what is important with the blockchain part is the accounting bit, right? That every single actor within the system has an address that you can then go back and query. Okay, so I originally wanted to show you, this thing. I don't want to walk over there, so whatever. But accountability or traceability in the blockchain is just a bunch of numbers, right? It's just if you were to actually go to a block store like Etherscan, all you see is a bunch of addresses going back. It just looks like gobbledygook, right? But that goes to show you that you can build entire business processes off these very simple, fundamental mathematical relationships, and that's the entire basis of the blockchain. So then, kind of, this just emphasizes, how a process particularly for a mineral supply chain could look. You start where you mine it, you put in information in block one, and then as you progress along the chain, you're never getting rid of information. Blockchains are append-only, right? So, and it's not even that I could be updating information, but every update, like if I accidentally put in the wrong number, I'm never going to get rid of the original number. All I can do is update it and then show that number was updated, right? And so here you go. You're just slowly adding more and more certifications, but all the time, even at the very end, to the end user, you have access to all the data that was originally done. And this is a very common kind of idea that people are. I think it's pretty common for anything, but the fact is, with blockchains, it's near impossible to ever get rid of that information once it's attributed to the object.
Just like a quick question.
Yeah.
In that example, you had all of the data is actually stored in the blockchain, but you only really need the hash type for each update. So
this is a good point, and it's something I address towards the end is when we talk about storage. What Asher's saying is that I have a couple of options, right? I could bit by bit put all this information somehow on the asset or the token or whatever, right? If I have some way to update the actual data, but that means that the thing that gets passed around the chain, when I say pass around the chain, remember every node in the network has to have a copy of that data. So if I have a 3 megabyte object, which this thing might be at the very end, the entire network has to get that 3 megabyte object. And now imagine if there's 100 million of us doing this, right? Now you just have this exponential growth of information. Conversely, what you could do is instead of actually putting each one of these individual things on the chain, you could take this first one and create what's called a Merkle tree. Or basically, you can figure out some way to hash it together, right? You just create some sort of data structure that is a fingerprint of this information, right? And then whenever someone asks, and then you put that on the chain, right? And that one hash is what sits there. And then when someone asks you for what this information is, you give them the real information and you say, this is how I verbalized it. Now you can go check me on the chain, right? So then they take the information you gave them, they verbalize it, and they go check the hashes what's on the chain. And you could do the whole thing. And that way you're able to cut out a lot of what data you actually put, because you're only putting a fixed length string on the chain. But you can still provide veracity of the verification claim that you need to prove to people that this is correct. Because hashing is is a unique way to identify things for all intents and purposes. So then I just want to say, like, what are some active projects, kind of, where businesses being built around this idea of traceability, what you can do. We'll talk about a couple of them a little more in depth, but so healthcare is a big thing with these supply chains, food supply chains, so many companies, and international shipping. And the one I really like, though, is this little cat. Does anyone want to guess? So this is, if you don't know, this is what's called a CryptoKitty. Does anyone want to guess how much that CryptoKitty sold for a little under a year ago? I guess about 8 months ago.
700 and something thousand? Is that right? Not quite.
I don't think it was quite 700. The number I looked up was 170.
Okay.
Right. That cat, someone paid $170,000 for that digital picture, and that's it. They didn't get anything else other than that digital picture and the key, the ownership of that digital picture recorded on a decentralized blockchain, right? And that's it, right? So traceability's, other kind of outside the idea of supply chains per se, but the traceability as a proof that you have ownership of something is, for CryptoKitties, whether you have digital goods or collectibles or art or diamonds, it's already we're doing some really crazy things. That there's, I don't go into the next slide, but this connection between the digital world, like keeping everything digital, makes it really easy to go into blockchain, right? Imagine you have a trading card game that you get a sword in, and then you can actually take your proof of that sword into a blockchain and then go connect it to another game where you actually get a 3D model of that sword in the game, right? These are things that people are doing. Or you can actually do land titles, right? Of a digital plot of land in the game, right? And people sell this. And so, it's, if anything's more political than that, I don't know. But this is what's already happening. Okay, so then just like I said, I'm very much these are things that I don't know the specifics of these particular projects, by heart. In general, the technology that they're using to underlie them is we can talk more about. But one of the big players in food supply chains is the IBM Food Trust. Right? IBM has been doing so much with Hyperledger in the past roughly 4 or 5 years. And this IBM Food Trust is actually like a permissioned private network that people can just purchase, and it provides an end-to-end solution with front ends and onboarding mechanisms and ways to actually get data and provide certifications and credibility for your agricultural your goods already kind of figured out and just handed to you. And then one of the things that I pointed out here is that they've adopted this thing called the GS1 standard, which is really just a way to label your food. But because they are providing this kind of really robust solution for the blockchain, and they just built it around this standard is growing enormously. Right? It had already been 50% of the world use this, but now it's something like 80%. And just the adoption of the standard can make transnational trade that much easier. Okay, so then this was a little silly to me. So Walmart has been doing, last year about 18 months ago, I guess, they announced they partnered with IBM and wanted to do something where they built a solution to track leaf greens. And really it was for, like I said earlier, this E. coli. And so they've since done it, and they've actually made it mandatory that all of their suppliers have to use the system to track their leafy greens. And part of that, though, nope, it's off. Oh well. So part of that is that they've actually been exploring this smart packaging patent, right? Which is a way, maybe I should have actually put it earlier, but why I said a second ago that the digital to digital worlds, blockchain to games or something is really easy because it all stays in the digital realm. And you have a big problem when you need to do what I affectionately called the last time we did this, the meatbag problem, which is how do you tie the physical world to the digital world and have that be, how do you make true claims about that? So they're in line with this leafy green initiative. They've been pursuing a patent for smart packaging. So a way that once the thing has actually been packaged, then it can take in actually do measurements of the produce itself as well as the outside environment. That way you can, even though my supplier said it stayed at -30 for 6 hours, I actually have measurements. And I've digitally signed digitally measurements that got put onto a ledger that verifies that claim, right? So these are the kind of ideas that they're pursuing. And then what's actually really kind of cool, what this article talked about more, is taking this idea of smart contracts even a little further, and saying that we can actually do autonomous deliveries, or like through drones. So basically direct actual supplies shipments based on the digital signatures that you get when you get the supply and what you read from the actual data. So just improving efficiency even further. And then I included this last one because I thought it was just a funny name for this ledger, the beef ledger. But it's a project out of Australia targeting Australian beef. And what they actually do is they tag the cow with an RFID, which is pretty common. But once you have that tag, you now enforce that as it goes along the production line, that you can track where that meat was the entire time. And this is really to fight kind of meat counterfeiting that's really rampant in China, apparently. I didn't really know that they were doing crazy things with illegal meat. But so then another big one, which whatever. But it's funny, you can look this up, or we can talk about it later. But this international shipping, what this video here on the side is that Maersk has also partnered with IBM to apparently they did something where they actually tracked a shipment from I don't know, somewhere in northern Africa to just the Netherlands. It wasn't even that long of a path, and that one thing, they spent $40,000 to get a bouquet of flowers, and it took 300 documents or something, right? Like some ridiculous amount of paperwork and just bureaucracy to do a transnational shipment, but not one that's even very long. And so they're really hoping to pursue blockchains as a way to get rid of all this kind of bureaucratic stuff and have it built in, right? That's the idea, is that you have the audit trail and the signing and the actors all there already in the system, and you're not having to produce all this paperwork, right? Because one thing that blockchains are really good for is scarcity, right? That's the way I kind of think in my head, is that you're able to prove that one thing is the only copy of it. Because if you make another copy of it, then it will have a different signature or something like this, right? And it really depends on how you build your structure, but that's generally the idea. And then so the other uses for healthcare and drugs, which there's another link for a YouTube video that's good. But essentially the medical devices, right, are really have to do a lot to make sure that they're up to the standards. So being able to integrate into those supply chains is super useful. And then drug verification to combat counterfeiting. Insofar as even in other countries, counterfeiting is really rampant. People don't know they're paying for what they say is one drug, and it's not necessarily. Whereas if we can provide things like, so IBM again has come up with this paint, right? That they put on, it's an edible paint that they can put on the casings of pills, that you can then image the pill and see and extract the digital signature, and then use that signature to go check against the blockchain and check the veracity of that pill and see if that pill was actually issued by the person who's the paint would say it was issued by. So these are called, I name it a little bit later, but these are called crypto anchors. And this was really recently announced, something that's honestly really, really, really cool. Being able to embed these signatures actually into the device, or like your clothing, or yeah. So anyway, and then also just, I guess in the US, they had in like this year or something, there's supposed to be this really tough regulation going into place that pharma companies are supposed to be able to track each individual unit of like pills that are like bottles, or I don't know. They said units. I don't know if unit means each individual pill or like thing of pills. That's amazing. Like, that's so much data. I can't imagine. And so blockchains are a way that people are trying to do this. And it's not to say that you couldn't do this with other technologies. It's that it's already built into blockchains, and it's built up to be this decentralized thing. So we're not having to try to connect legacy systems together, right? We already kind of have it. Okay, so then we get back a little more. Oh, okay. So the last thing, and this is shameless plug for Topl. So we are actually working with this group in Colombia called Topl for Peace. That also uses traceability, right, and this supply chain functionality that we're building out for our blockchain. And the idea here is that they want to encourage and incentivize farmers to transition from, I always get it's cacao to coca, right, or the other way around. It's coca to cacao. There you go. Okay, see, I always get it wrong. Basically, from growing cocaine to growing chocolate, right, or producing cocaine to producing chocolate. And by doing this and being able to show where their chocolate is actually going, and you know, that they are building up this supply chain, they can then encourage more foreign investment to further expand this kind of process. So you know, these are the sorts of things that traceability and supply chains, like new business processes that they might enable. Okay, so then some of the challenges. I know I've kind of been alluding to them a little bit, but I want to spend a little bit of time. And this is a really good thing, right? Blockchains are not this magical thing, as I've said a couple of times, right? If you get garbage in, you get garbage out. You don't get, you know, a nice clean thing. A lot depends on how the processes you have in place. Blockchains will not replace a core business process. And in fact, you need to have more rigorously defined business processes, because you have to sit now. You have this high amount of accountability, and everyone needs to like actually interact with your system so that you can get all these claims that you're trying to use from this technology. Another big problem is storage space. So like Asher alluded to, actually, if you go try right now on Ethereum, I estimated, I could be off a little bit here, but if you try to put 125 kilobytes in a block, which is about the most they'll let you do, that would cost you $50 to put 120. That's like a 50th of a song or something, right? Like that's not even a picture that you take on your phone. That's a tiny amount of data. Remember, you were like floppy disk drives, at least the hard ones, not the 5.5, not 5.25. That was 1.4 megabytes, right? That's still an order of magnitude more data than this. Anyway, so that's just a tiny amount of data. But it's because every node in the network has to replicate it, right? And so, yes, it does provide censorship resistance and availability to everyone, because everyone has a copy, and so now it's much harder to get rid of all the copies, but it does come at the expense that you now have all this network activity, and everyone has to have it. And so I just also put here, the maximum Bitcoin size is 2 megabytes, and they're different here just because of basically the complexity. I just wanted to say that. Some ways that people are trying to do this is there are projects that are doing incentivized file storage, like Filecoin, or storage, or Airweave. Some of them are using local hard drive space. Some of them are using this thing called the interplanetary file system, which is this protocol for decentralized storage. It's this really cool thing, but it's got a really terrible interface right now. And so there's a lot of work going into this, but it's still really young, right? And we don't know, there's not these really rigorous processes around it. So right now, probably the best we have is actually some hybrid of traditional, like what I would call traditional backends, you know, SQL databases and storage servers that store the data, because we're really good. We've been doing that for years. And then putting hashes, right? Having ways that you can put the claim on, like putting small amounts of data on the chain that you can then go and check, right? But then you have to communicate to people how they do that and what this means and all this kind of stuff, right? If you could actually have the data on the chain, it kind of makes things a lot easier. Okay, so yeah, here, crypto anchors, really cool things. One of them is the paint that I talked about. One of them is, they actually have this, like, they call it the tiniest computer in the world. This little guy can, like, do not key generation, but he can do signing. It can actually, like, sign a cryptographic thing. Whereas the other, the paint, right, you have to take a picture of it. It's just this passive thing. So this is like an active device that can actually do stuff. And so, like, embedding a computer the size of a grain of rice into something, and have that it can, like, broadcast a message, and so it can interact with more powerful devices, is one other way to do this. Then, and this is just kind of really a furtherance of the IoT idea, right? That with the Internet of Things, there comes a whole other set of challenges. How do we get, like, global network everywhere? How do we deal with 2 trillion devices, or whatever it is, 20 trillion devices, all, like, transmitting data across the global internet? But if we can, then we can actually do things where you have, like, automated and signed measurement and reporting, right? So things that you could actually put devices, like, on the end of in an oil well, and have that, like, report back to you, and so you could actually then sign those claims, and, like, a lot of these are for, like, life cycle staging. Life cycles? No, asset life cycles. That's what I mean. Being able to put these in places where they do measurements and can report back to you, like, what the wear of your machinery is. And then they also mentioned with this IBM idea, what I call natural unique key generation. So actually doing something where you use, like, so in that video he shows a bar of gold, and he's like, now we're also developing technology that lets us image the lattice of this bar of gold, and using AI use the natural randomness of that, like, occurring thing to create a unique signature that can then be verified, or like not stamped, but, like, passed around with this bar of gold, and you can essentially, it's there. It's literally in the, like, DNA of the object, even though it's inorganic and whatever. But this is why I also put biometric signing, because humans have this as well. Imagine if you had your own, like, you actually use your DNA to use the natural, like, randomness that's present in your DNA and your genes to generate a key that's unique to you, right? You can already use DNA to, find criminals and do that sort of stuff, but imagine if you could actually do that and have, like, control over your money. And so then you could be the only one that would ever do that. Okay, so then security, like I said earlier, your security is only, yes, you get a lot of security from the blockchain because of the replication and all this stuff, but it really only goes so far as your processes and how will you actually enable it. And one of the big ones is key management. So you might not know this, but, like, the little green, like, padlock you get in your browser, the, like, secure thing, all of those, that little green padlock exists because there's a network of certificate authorities, and those certificate authorities are, like, globally recognized as being trusted people that issue these certificates, and then we all decide they're, like, hard-coded into our browsers that we accept them, right? But the way you generate those certificates is that those authorities have keys, and those keys are guarded like they're Fort Knox, right? Because if you ever hack those keys, you could generate malicious certificates, and it would appear no one would ever know, right? So while that's what I'm trying to show here is that key management, and what blockchains give you, are this great way to identify and say, like, you're Alice, you're Bob. But if Alice steals Bob's key, for all intents and purposes, Alice is Bob now, right? Because the only way that I have to identify her, or to identify Bob, is with his private key. And if you lose the private key, you've lost your identity, essentially, right? Then there are ways, like, how do you then teach people about this, and how, like, they can't ever delete their private key, or really the best way to ever, like, manage these keys is to have them in cold storage. Like, you actually never put the key into a network space. And so these are, like, a whole different set of challenges that we have to approach. So it's not as easy as just saying that it's unhackable, because that right there, like, losing your private key is a surefire way to get hacked. Okay, so then consensus processes. Most of these private chains use something called Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus algorithms, or practical Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus algorithms, which is what I said earlier, where you get this. So like Ethereum and Bitcoin, these give you their probabilistic security guarantees. They give you things that, like over a certain amount of time, given that you have an honest majority, everyone will come to eventual consensus. That's the term, eventual consensus. Byzantine fault-tolerant algorithms give you absolute consensus, or absolute finality, right? Every single block, we all come to agreement, and we say, this is the state of the network, and we move on, okay? The way you do that is you increase the amount of messages that they pass around one another. Given that we talk to each other enough, eventually we'll come to a consensus. And so they do this in a number of rounds, right? And so this is, was immortalized with this, general's problem, the Byzantine general's problem, which is you have a bunch of generals that are all trying to attack a castle, and if they don't do it all together, if some of them leave, then they'll fail. But if they all do it together, they'll win. And so then you can just define an algorithm that says, given a certain number of rounds and a certain number of messages passed, we can actually all come to agreement and say when we're going to attack together. So this is a really well-studied problem, we know, right? And the practical part is like how we actually do this in the real world, because the academic solution is crazy. But so then what I say, POS, POW. Okay, so we're almost done. It's like 2 slides out. But I really love this Bitcoin gold attack thing, and I just want to say it really quick. I could get my numbers wrong. I apologize. But a couple months ago, or 5 or 6 months ago, so we all know in December or January 2018, right, the price of Bitcoin was almost $20,000. It was crazy, and then it fell 84%. Right, this terrible wipeout of all this value. And so what that happened is during the run-up, it became profitable for some people to set up cloud mining rigs. Basically, they just set up a bunch of machines and then put them in a room, and then put a web page for people to go pay some money and rent out the machines and just mine for them, right? And then the price fell so hard that was no longer profitable, and so those machines just sat in the room, waiting for people to use them, and no one was doing it because it was no longer profitable. So then what some savvy investors figured out is there's a fork of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Gold that was accepted by exchanges, right? So you could go and buy and sell Bitcoin Gold on public, big exchanges. So what they did is, like I said, I could get the numbers wrong, but over some amount of time, they went and bought up a bunch of Bitcoin Gold, right? Then they spent something like $200,000, rented out one of these big machines, one of these big mining operations, then attacked the Bitcoin Gold network. And by attacked, all I mean is they added their hashing power to it and became the 51% majority or 60% majority or whatever, and then just said, all right, we have all of this Bitcoin Gold that we bought over a couple months. Here, exchanges, please give us some money for it, give us fiat. And they went and they sold it. They got their 10 million in fiat. Then they said, all right, great, we're going to go back and we're actually going to reverse that transaction. And so they just went to a block, they took their big mining power, and they said, okay, to us, history is now is the moment before we sold all the Bitcoin. And then all they had to do was generate a chain that was longer than the chain that everyone else agreed was the history. And when they did that, the Bitcoin algorithm, all the miners said, oh, that's the new chain because it's the longest one. And they all jumped to the new chain. And so now all of a sudden the exchanges were out of the money because they had already given the fiat, and they no longer had the Bitcoin Gold because the Bitcoin Gold reverted because they had started from a point in time that was before they'd actually sold it. Right? So they made something like 10 million or millions of dollars and only spent 200,000 because people just didn't look at it was there and it was easy to do. Okay, so that whole thing to say is these security guarantees, these things happen. It's not your security. It's not unhackable. It's nothing you just have to be. You have to do it the right way. Bitcoin is never going to get hacked, probably, because there's just so much mining power. This was possible because Bitcoin Gold was just a really little network, right? It didn't have a lot of people doing it, and it's proof of work, which proof of work is inherently bad, just for the environment. But anyway, there was a number of reasons that it all kind of happened. But that's to say, you don't just take that it's it's unhackable, right? There are things you need to consider. And then finally, it's a very young technology, right? This kind of Bitcoin gold thing was possible because we don't know, like it's still stuff that we're figuring out. We don't know the best use cases. We don't know, how to get people to keep their keys and not like lose them. Okay, so then last slide. Some of the most exciting things that are supply chain, are like traceability, really, right? This more broad topic that I was thinking of with traceability. That with blockchains you can do pretty much like perfect media licensing, right? I don't like DRM personally, but like blockchains give you the ability to do just perfect licensing, right? There's basically a way, like there's a place you have to go to check to make sure that you have the license to run this piece of software or to play this song or something, right? Like it's not a piece of encryption tacked onto the thing that can be broken. It is literally you have to go to this. In that case, the funny thing is this: the blockchain then becomes this like central authority that you have to go check against. But it is possible, and it's actually something that people are working, to my chagrin. But then, so what we talked about a little bit, is digital goods and services. There's actually, a thing called decentralized, which is people are doing this whole like buying the land and what we talked about. In a very broad sense, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, are a traceability mechanism, right? Because the way a DAO works is you put money into this, out of the goodness of your heart, or maybe you just want to see it, for whatever reason. There's a bunch of different motives, but a DAO is essentially a pool of money. People contribute to the DAO, and when you contribute to the DAO, you now get some voting share, right? You get some like stake in the governance of the DAO, and then other people can submit proposals to the DAO to say, I want so much money to be pulled out of the DAO, and I will do this with it, and I will meet benchmark 1, 2, 3 by these dates, right? And then the governing people, the people who have contributed, who have the governance, can vote and say, we really like this project, we want to give it some money, and they say, we'll do it. But then each person can, it depends on the structure of the DAO, but why I say it's like traceability is because then you can say, I will give you this money, but only contingent on the idea that you actually hit your target that you've put forward as 1, 2, and 3 by these dates. And if you don't, then you have to come back and defend to us why. And having this like traceability, accountability, like built into the actual like funding mechanism. And it's not just a Kickstarter where you give some money and you hope in 6 months that you don't get the email that says they've closed the shop, or just don't get anything at all. So then there's this really cool guy who's running this project called Giveth, which is it's like a DAO, but it's a little more. It's targeting toward like charitable organizations, really with the idea that the people on the ground are the ones that know how to make the decisions and like what's best for the charity, and not the people that are actually giving the money. And so it's why do we let billionaires and millionaires decide where the money is going to go when it's really the people there? So he's building tools to like, yes, they should have a say, they should be able to, the people who contribute, but it's really bringing the power to the people that can best make decisions. Okay, so then this is a really cool thing as well. Computable aggregate data. I made this term up. I don't know if it actually works, but this traceability is this idea that we can do like with homomorphic encryption, you can actually like check out health data or market data or something like this, and it can be encrypted in such a way that I can then run like computations on it. I can figure out like averages, or I can like cut the data a certain way, and so I can, without revealing any of the underlying personal like information, without revealing anything in this like zero knowledge way, I can still get aggregate information out of it, right? And then the traceability part being that when you do this, you can also say like, well, who checked out that data? Who did these computations? Right? And you can have this like built into the actual mechanisms. So this is a way to like, hospitals have tons of data, but because of like HIPAA and like privacy stuff, which is legitimate, right? They're not able to give it out. Or if they do, it has to be scrubbed, and which is a like bureaucratic mess. And so this is very, very early actually. Like this is an active research area right there, homomorphic encryption. But it's, I don't know, for this reason I really like it. Okay, and then data sovereignty, last one. This idea that I should be in control of my data, right? I give Facebook all this, or I give Google all of this data, all this metadata about me. and I get to use their services for free, yes, but I also get ads, right, all this stuff. And I don't know who they give it to or anything, right? So then data sovereignty is the idea that you build mechanisms such that, yes, all this data that you generate, you actually control, and you can decide who you want to let out certain parts of it to. And you always have the ability to revoke it. So it's no longer like putting these like organizations here and us coming to the organization. It's more like person focused, and the organizations have to come to you and ask you for your permission. And also being able to say, like, if someone does then give up your data, you can know who it was, because like you signed it, right? You can say, I have a piece of data, I'm going to let Google track my location, right? And say, I will let Google do it. But if I will sign it and say Google, and I put a thing on that authorization that says Google, like James says Google can do this from X date to Y date, okay? Then if Google tries to forward that data onto someone else, the signature won't match, right? And it's essentially like it's useless to the person. Or if you know something, it wasn't implemented in such a way that they could forward the data on, I could then look and say, you have this data, where's the signature of that data? And then say, well, look, you actually violated the terms of my sovereignty because you didn't, like Google forward this data on when they shouldn't have. And so that, I know this is like a bit all over the place, and it really becomes like an implementation specific thing there. But these are the kind of things that are possible. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So I'm, like I said, James Topl, and I don't know if anyone has any questions. I feel like I talked really fast. I apologize if I was all over the place.